This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 365. That's right, folks. You can now listen to one episode of the DRF Players Podcast every day for an entire calendar year and not run out of DRF Players Podcast. It is the September 7th, 2015 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you once again in the Brooklyn bunker, feeling a little less glum than the last time we spoke on the day I not so affectionately referred to as the worst day of the year, the Tuesday after Labor Day. Had a few days to recover, to reflect, to look forward, to get excited about a lot of things going on in the racing world and beyond. One of those things is the Kentucky Downs meeting that we will be talking about today, pretty much throughout this show. Joined today not by just the usual co-pilot, but by a very special guest. We'll start with the co-pilot, though. If you're listening live, you heard him clearing his throat during the Willie Nile intro. We'll have producer AJ fix that for the podcast, so you folks won't know what I'm talking about. But you know who I'm talking about, and it's the People's Champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
That wasn't me, PTF.
Really?
Yeah, that wasn't me. I think that's our other co-pilot.
Oh, we'll get to him in a minute. I should have known you, the master of the mute button, wouldn't make such a rookie mistake, JK.
I am the muter of all muters. In fact, sometimes too often.
To a fault, you could say. How was your first week? Really quick, how was your first week since the summer meets have ended?
It's been good. I made a quick trip up to New York, a non-racing trip. It was weird being across a body of water from you with a 20 to 30 minute commute, not being able to see your smiling face. But, it was an in and out trip. My brother had like a little kind of industry show, and I went to just kind of hang out with him for a couple of days. So it was fun.
Perhaps if it hadn't been 100 degrees with 105% humidity, we would have found a way to make that happen. Next up, I want to introduce our special guest. He was on a few weeks ago. Big hit. Got a lot of kudos, not just for his appearance on the podcast, but for his fantastic Twitter account all throughout the Saratoga meeting. The mystery coffer, the founder of Public Handicapper, super accomplished contest player, Scott Carson. Scott, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks a lot for having me.
Scott, your Twitter handle, very popular during Saratoga. We talked about it as the meet started, the $50,000 challenge. Give the folks some broad strokes here. How did it go?
Well, it didn't go as well as I had hoped. I can say that. I ended out losing $25,000, and as the challenge went on, I learned a lot of things about how to handle it and how much I was going to have to bet. And it turned out that I was never in the plus column, so that was a bummer. But I'd say the best way to think of the whole challenge was that it was like a contest. It was like a 6-week contest. So imagine, JK, you'll understand this. You've got a 1-day contest, and you play a little bit lighter, maybe earlier in the day, and so earlier in the meet I didn't bet as much. But then towards the end, I really wanted to win the $50,000. So even though I was down $20,000 going into the last day, I had hopes of showing that $50,000 profit, which would have been, not only profitable, but it would have been legendary, right? I mean, it would have been tremendous to actually hit that last late pick 5, which paid $60,000. Oh. That wouldn't have put me up. It wouldn't have put me up $50,000, but it would have put me up, $35,000, and that would have been rewarding. So, it was an emotional. I went through everything. It was a lot of depression, a lot of stress.
Going around. Those
yeah.
Going around.
Yeah, depression, stress. When I was down $17,000, kind of halfway through the meet, then I really started freaking out because I didn't want to lose $50,000, and luckily I had some wins and I got back to about 3,000 down. Then towards the end, I lost 4,000 or so each day of the weekend, the 3-day weekend, including 5,000 on the last day. And, I don't really have any regrets about that because it was like a contest. I was shooting for the 50 grand, and I don't know that I would do anything on the last few days different.
Well, what overall, if you had one thing overall to say that you do differently if you ever did something crazy like this again, what would that thing be?
I would do two things. First, I wouldn't bet $3,000 or $4,000 on Monmouth on Haskell Day. That ended out, it was just kind of reckless. I didn't have enough time, but I was at the track and I was with friends, and the year before I had totally dominated. So I sort of wanted to do that again. So I would exclude that, or I would, severely limit the amount I bet there. And then I would bet more on the opinions that I really liked that were double digits. And that would include Ruby Notion, who was 27-1, who I only had something like $100 on. And Glorious Empire, who I picked on Public Handicapper at 15-1. And I hit the exact, and I made like $6,000 on that, but I didn't bet him to win. So, if that had been the last day of the contest, I would have bet 5,000 on him to win, and would have made a lot more money. So zero in on my better opinions, and try not to do anything silly like I did with Monmouth.
That sounds really like very smart advice. It's so simple, but so few players are able to do it. JK, I want to bring you back in here, and at some point I want to give you a chance to ask a question or two of Scott. But right now I want to ask you one, and that's as a contest player and as the aggressive gambler that you are, if you were given this same $50,000 challenge for a meet like Saratoga, how do you think you would have gone about trying to hit that target number?
I think, it was one of the questions I was going to ask, and I think I know the answer just from following the Twitter feed. But I think one of the things I would, just the way that I play, is I would have tried to not play every day. I feel like, it's just like in contests, like Scott mentioned, there's a 10-race card. There's a lot of races we're passing on. So I think that I would have tried to convince myself. And I think that having a little bit of hindsight, watching Scott do this, which I thought was really cool, to maybe mix in some skipped days. Where I don't find myself losing when I shouldn't, and kind of avoiding some of the wasteful break-even days that I'm sure Scott experienced throughout. But it's tough, man. It's hard when if Scott would have done a $500 challenge, he probably it would have been a completely different result. He wouldn't have lost $250 in a $500 result in a $500 challenge. The reason that it's complicated is that at the end of the day, that's $50,000 is a lot of money, and it makes you make decisions differently. Like he said, he only bet $100 on Glorious Empire, or not Glorious Empire, excuse me, on Ruby Notion. If he was playing the $500 challenge, he probably still would have bet $100 on Ruby Notion. I think the dollar amounts, when they start to get larger, make it much more complicated, a lot more to try to sift through.
Those economies of scale are definitely a big issue, and one that I'm sure you faced a lot, Scott. I want to ask about, this is sort of a rapid fire question, but which pools did you find yourself the most active in, or did you really spread it around?
Good question. I really tried to hit the pick five almost every day, and it can pay so well, and I probably would do it a little different next time. Like we discussed a rule. I don't know if Jonathan and I both agreed on it, but I have a rule that if you can't narrow one of the legs down to two horses, then you shouldn't play it. And I still played it even when I only had three horses. When I had to go at least three deep in every leg. And the reason I did that is because I saw these gigantic payoffs happening so often. And I thought, even when I didn't have a strong opinion, hey, I could still maybe pull 10 grand out of this day, even though I don't have a strong opinion on one particular horse. So I ended up blowing a lot of money on that, and I swear I hit 4 or 5 almost every single time. So, I mean, it was
to that
kind of brutal. But that's what could I do? I mean, I would text my girlfriend and say I'm alive after 4 legs, and then the last leg I'd be like, I'm out.
I've had meets like that. We all have. What was your best day? What was the thing that you were proudest of in the challenge?
Okay, and just to finish answering your question, the other thing that I hit a lot, exactas were really good. I just exactas were, you only have 2 horses, so I did a lot of win and exacta, and that's where I ended up in the pool the most. Even though super might be good, it's hard to get, it's hard to hit. So. The thing I'm proudest of is the day that I spent the least time handicapping. It was when I was leaving Saratoga, and I hadn't handicapped at all until Sunday morning. So it was, that morning I had friends over and I had to socialize, so I couldn't handicap, couldn't spend that much time. I quickly ripped through the card. I found one play that I liked, which was Tap Tap Taparoo. I don't know if anybody else remembers that horse, but I think it was a maiden race, sprint. And I said, this horse, and I watched the replay of its previous race, and it had a terrible trip. And I said, hey, this horse is, I'm going to pound this horse. So I put 500 to win on it. I tweeted about it. I did a $100 exacta box with the only horse that I was worried about. And it came in while I was driving. And, the phone froze on the turn, so that sucked. Then I started getting tweets. Tweets started coming in. Nice hit. So I knew I had done it. So that was the proudest, because I didn't do any other betting that day. And if I had limited my, like Jonathan said, if I had limited the amount that I played to just just look at the card, find one horse or 2 horses, however many there are, decide what you're going to bet and leave it at that. Don't try to nail the pick 5 every time. So anyway, that horse, Tap Tap Taparoo, I ended up making 8,000 on the race. And, that was my best day.
Scott, I got a couple questions, and they're kind of different. The first one is, we always talk about, how bad beats are, everyone's got a bad beat story, but did you have a will pay that you were alive to that was going to make a huge difference in your challenge, and unfortunately you got snapped late, or you got a bad trip, or some weird thing like that? That was the first question. The other one is, and you don't have to go into specifics at all, if whatever, but were you able to do this challenge while getting a rebate, and did you consider that in your final number?
Okay, two great questions. So I did not ever have a giant payoff. Yeah, I usually got eliminated early, so I didn't have any great payoffs going into the last leg. So I don't have any of those terrible bad beat stories. I did have one really big pick 5 that I thought was going to be huge, and I bet 800 into it. And it turned out that one of the horses that I was betting against, it was a Chad Brown turf horse in a stakes race. He scratched at the gate. And so then everybody who had that horse then went to the favorite, who won. And then going into the very last leg, the horse I liked the most scratched, so then went for purse money only, and I ended out only getting a $600 payoff. That was sort of the worst, because that was the one bet that I was thinking, this could be it, And I didn't have one, it kind of fell apart with all those scratches and the favorites winning. So that was the most disappointing thing for me. Not a great
that was the PG Johnson, I believe, Scott, and you and I were in the same boat there, looking good. I can't remember the name of the fancied first time U.S. horse of Chad's who ended up scratching at the gate, but I think it was Dog Tag that ended up winning. And I had calculated my impressive winnings and was feeling, confident going into the race, and in the end, I won about enough to get a burger and a milkshake at the Shake Shack over there. Which so I think people can definitely relate to that. Can relate to that frustration. I am curious about JK's rebate question, and also, did you keep track of how much you handled during the meet?
Yes, I did. So the answer to the rebates is I did get rebates for sure. I did not include that into the equation. Now, I could go back and figure out how much, there's a record of all the rebates, but I did not include that. Maybe I should have, but maybe it's $500 or $1,000. I can't imagine it's that much. So yes, I did use rebates, but no, they weren't included in the final figure. As far as handle is concerned, I can bring that up right now. I think I put through, I bet $92,000, and I got a return of $67,000.
Gotcha.
So I put a lot of money through the windows. Absolutely. I was a handle machine. So I did get a lot of payoffs, but I just, I was still down 25,000.
I love that you have all your records there. I think there's a lot to learn. We won't do it on air, but if you're interested in some more specific feedback, if this is something you'd ever consider again, I'd love to take a look at some things and maybe offer some advice. Well, but let me ask you that very question I just brought up. Would you consider doing something like this again, or was this a one-off?
I don't think I would do it again because it really took a toll on my personal life. My girlfriend, the weekends are when the races are the best, right? And my girlfriend works during the week, and she was like, "Are you playing today?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have to." I'm sorry. So I probably can't do that again. But the other thing is that you by framing it, by narrowing it to a particular meet, you're forcing yourself to take swings in order to achieve the goal, and that's okay with a 2-day contest like the Breeders' Cup. But the reason why it's okay there is because it's much less money. You're starting with $7,500. So I probably won't do. I won't ever do that exact type of thing again because I put too much pressure on myself.
You're making good point after good point here. A couple of things occur to me. One is how great live bankroll contests are for the way that they offer an opportunity for players, such as the two guys I'm talking to who do, well, occasionally have other work going on. I guess, Scott, you've been focusing on this full time for a little while. But for people with jobs, the ability to have a chance to make scores and to play at a pro level, essentially, for a very short amount of time, there's something really cool and important about that I just felt like underlining. The other thing that occurs to me is, and maybe Scott, for the reasons you decided you wouldn't want to be part of it, so JK, I'll throw this out to you, and I don't know how it would go. It's just absolute beginnings of something brainstorming here, JK. Who knows? It could end up on TV someday. We've had weirder brainstorms that did. Where you had a meet-long contest, you somehow came up with a way for a track to incentivize a certain group of players to put up $50,000 for the meet, and you basically had a meet-long contest of professional bettors, and you had to have certain minimums, whatever they'd be, maybe an amount per day. What's your gut on that idea, JK, of a high bankroll? I know there's one listener out there in particular who's always a big fan of trying to get higher bankroll contests on the docket. Hi, Tony. If you had a meet-long high bankroll contest that pitted professional level players against each other at a meet like Saratoga, your thoughts, JK?
I think it'd be really, really cool. Horse players like options. That's why it's one of the top 10 things horse players whine about is options when it comes to options and quality. Oh, the races aren't good. Oh, this card's not good. I don't like the card. If you can't find 5 cards you like or 10 cards you like in a 40-day meet at Saratoga, then you should probably find a different game. So I think that's definitely a great avenue that a kind of a larger longer term period contest would have. I think it'd be really cool. It'd be fun to watch. It'd be fun to track as players go along and kind of open up the betting menu. I think it'd be really cool.
Scott, what's your gut about it? You'd have an advantage having done it once. Putting your own personal experience and the life stresses aside, what do you think of the concept of a contest like that?
Yeah, I think it could be interesting. It may not be as appealing as from a spectator's point of view, just because, you'd have to tune in almost daily to find out what the results are, and everybody has their busy schedules. So, from that perspective, I'm not sure how much appeal it would have, but I'm up for almost any contest. Any format, any flavor. They're all interesting. So why not?
I like it. Some breaking news on the DRF Players Podcast. We don't often get to do this. Article just got published that I have been waiting for. I heard rumors about this happening. One of the debut pieces of content from our friends at the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation. This is their breakage report. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I just saw that it's finally been published. We're going to retweet it. Certainly JK and I, maybe Scott, if he likes and is feeling magnanimous, we'll send this around. We'll have a chorus of retweets. But I'm sure if you also follow at Racing Ideas, you can find it on there as well. But I'm really excited to check that out. Just a little thing that I wanted to share with you all in real time. We're kind of at the point where we should probably tip this to talk about races. But there was one thing in the recapping of the Saratoga meet that we did last time that we didn't get to. And I was kind of glad to have left it alone with the mood I was in on Tuesday. And as I've said before, I want it to be the DRF Players Podcast, not the Naira Stewards Podcast. But I did think, and I have a little funny story to button it up with too, that September 1st, 8th race, double DQ was worthy of a few moments of discussion. Scott, do you know exactly what I'm talking about right away?
Yeah, absolutely.
What did you think of this decision where ultimately the third place finisher got put up to first place? I have a strong opinion about it. Haven't talked to you or JK. Who knows? Maybe we'll get some lively disagreement. Maybe we'll all say the same thing. But what did you think of it? I will say that at the last minute, I had trimmed both the 10 and the 4, or the 8 and the 4. I guess the first-time turfer that won the race and finished ahead, and the Clement horse that finished second. So I was not expecting that double DQ at all. It was funny that they were blinking, but I was really depressed at the moment because I had tossed those horses at the last minute. And I think might have been the first leg of the pick 5. So when the double DQ happened, I was like, holy shit, I'm still alive. I can't believe it. But I got knocked out later. I was amazed by it. I mean, I thought that I was not smart like certain folks. I heard Nick Tamaro had used the horse who passed the post first, Tom Albertrani. I didn't see that horse at all. And not because of that, but just objectively watching the race, it occurred to me that that horse had to come down to me because of the bumping and the incident that I thought that horse caused. However, the horse on the outside, wow, there was movement in an inward direction throughout the stretch. I felt like at the time of the incident, very clearly it was just caused by the 8. The 8 should have come down, and that should have been the end of it. Instead, we saw the double disqualification, and it just left me in a meeting that had many moments where the stewards left me flabbergasted. I think this was the one where I was the most flabbergasted. I'm almost tempted to say, whereas with the other situations, a late Abel Tasman, for example, I've tried to preface remarks by saying reasonable people can disagree about this one. I'm not sure I can even say that about this one, JK. Where did you stand on the decision?
Well, oddly enough, this was around the time that I was in London at a festival trying to hurry up and steal steal some Wi-Fi so I can watch the rest of the races on the day. Here's the tricky thing about this one for me is I think a lot of these stewards inquiries, if you have a dog in the fight, they impact your decision.
Your opinion.
Your opinion, excuse me, but I did not have a dog in the fight. After watching it over and over again with the head on, I think that there is a reasonable argument that can be made that the 8 should have absolutely come down.
Oh, definitely. I think there's no question the 8 should have come down.
But the problem is that if you try to physically take the 8 out of your mind and out of your view, you can make an argument that the 4 should have come down as well. But at the same time, it feels like the 8's movement on the 10 affected the 4's coming over on the 10 on the 10. Like they were like the 4 wasn't as egregious as the 8.
I don't think it was egregious at all. I think the horse ran, came in, but that final action where I guess it's the 10 has to stop riding completely, that doesn't happen without the 8's, as you said, egregious foul.
Yeah, but the thing is at the top of the stretch of the 8th pole, the 4 was in the 8 path. And when the contact happened, the 4 was in the 4 path.
But they don't look at that. The horses don't run a straight line all the time, and they're never.
No, but he came in position. He did come over on 10 a little bit. I mean, at least it's a C, Yeah. But the problem being is the 10 was never going to beat either one of them. What
do you think, Scott?
I didn't weigh in. I didn't look at it as closely as I'm sure many people did because I was just bummed out. I didn't assume that the horse was going to come down. Like I wasn't like, oh, that horse is coming down. But I also could see the argument for possibly taking him down. So
you're talking about the outside horse.
Yeah, the 4. It's not one of those unlike a lot of people who I saw on Twitter saying the stewards are the worst. I did not feel that way. But I will say, I wasn't looking at it that closely. But it seemed to me like, hey, maybe they'll do that, but whatever. Maybe they'll DQ the horse. So I think I'm of the opinion that in that case, reasonable minds could still disagree.
Fair enough. I do have I will say this, reiterate a point made a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of this would be clarified with better communication and explanation from the stand, place on the website where every decision is detailed, where we could get some of that consistency, JK, that you've longed for in the past, the absence of which makes horse players completely crazy and makes them not want to spend their money. That would help an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, like we've saw before, I think that this situation is more frustrating. The frustration is magnified because of 2 reasons. One, because of the inconsistency when it comes to what the stewards have been doing throughout the entire meet. The other one is, please do not discount the fact that this is extremely annoying because even when you beat Chad, you can't beat Chad. And I don't think the decision was made. I don't think Chad being involved had anything to do with the steward's decision. Oh, I don't think it's like one of those. Oh, those horses are never going to take Baffert down. It's not that. Those stewards are never going to take Baffert down. What it is to me is it magnifies people's annoyance. We spend the entire meet trying to beat Chad, and then you have some wishy-washy situation where 3 weeks ago this was a DQ, this wasn't a DQ, and now even when you do beat him, you still don't beat him.
It's pretty insane when you think about it that way. All right, very quickly to button that up. One person was real happy about this double DQ. Well, he also did not agree with it. Harvey Pack. Harvey told me, he's a small bettor, big follower of Andy Serling. And he will typically he'll bet dollars in races that he's following. He'll listen when Andy picks a long shot. He'll look and see if he agrees. If he agrees, he will bet the race, and he'll do something on the order of a couple of dollars to win, and then maybe a little box with the intriguing long shot in exactas and or trifectas with the other logical horses. So in this instance, here he was. He had played the horse across the line first, thought he'd won $50 or whatever. I think he was stuck about 200 on the meet. Well, the double DQ gives him the try. He ends up making 300 on the race getting up and out. But he says to me, "Don't worry, little Andy took care of me. I gave the 100 back the next 2 days." But anyway, at least Harvey Pack got out as a result of this double disqualification, and I got his blessing to relay that story on the air. And he said, "That's okay, just as long as you tell it right." Hopefully, Harvey, I did. Let's talk about Kentucky Downs, gentlemen. 4 graded stakes races. This meet has really become something that horse players circle on the calendar and pay attention to. It's always hard that first Saturday when we're up at Saratoga, but to come down here and get to look at racing like this for this Saturday, it's pretty exciting stuff. Let's start with the race that goes as the 7th, the Ladies Turf. Scott, as our guest, we'll give you the honor. What'd you come up with in here? Should also mention, these are the races that are part of the Public Handicapper Challenge this weekend. Folks need to get involved with Public Handicapper and the various contests on there. Scott, what's your thought on this Ladies Turf?
Okay, in this race, I'm going to go deep in the pick 4. I think the horses are really evenly matched. But the horse I'm going to pick as the winner is Pas de Soucis, who ran her 2 best races ever to start the year off. And then in her last race, which was a stake race on the soft, just, reacted a little bit and just didn't fire, finished 3rd. And she looks like she's poised at 8-1 to run the race of her life. So that would be my number 1 choice. My number 2 choice would be In the Lee, the Shug McGahee horse, 2 more out. That one's at 5-1. And I like those 2 horses enough that I might, press up in the pick 4 and maybe do a mini crushable exacta, like a $50 exacta between those 2.
I like it. Now, JK, you're on record as saying that if you and I put on a horse suit and we went to the barn of Mike Maker, that you'd look to bet us on the turf. Does that mean it's as simple as number 1, I'm Betty G here for you?
I do like I'm Betty G, but because I like I'm Betty G, I'm actually going to use Bonnie Arch instead. Coming out of the same race at Ellis Park, Bonnie Arch was a little bit wider. The pace was solid enough in that race at Ellis Park. And I just feel like you're going to get a lot more value. You're going to probably get a better trip with Bonnie Arch. If they do go forward again, Bonnie Arch can sit off of I'm a Betty G and not have to dictate or not have the pace dictated to her. She can kind of sit a good trip, and she's going to be a much better price. I think in the pick 5 that I gave on out of the gate, I used 4 horses: the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 6. But I think if for some value play and for a contest setting, I would look at a horse like Bonnie Arch, who practically ran the same race as I'm Betty G, but is going to be 3 or 4 times the price.
I love that type of old school form handicapping angle. Form handicapping still such a huge deal in the UK and Ireland, and I think it's sometimes underutilized in the USA when you've got, and JK said it best, you've got a horse who's going to be 4 times the price, maybe more, who was beaten 2 lengths, and maybe we'll find the configuration, the way, the profile of the track at Kentucky Downs a little bit more to her liking. So interesting thoughts there. For the record, I did like that McGahee filly that Scott mentioned, In the Lee. Was that the name?
Yeah.
Let's move on to the ladies sprint. JK, will keep it with you.
Yeah, this race is a little bit harder for me because on class and on form, I think that the Ruby Notion and Lowell obviously are going to be horses that are going to be very likely, and they're not going to present too much value. Lowell obviously being the kind of the bigger name, the classier of the 2, but Ruby Notion also being more than capable, and obviously a horse that holds a special spot in Scott's heart. I have always kind of liked Noted and Quoted, and I remember, and I don't remember who told me this, but way back when she first started, someone pointed out that they thought that she kind of moved like a turf horse, but obviously she was with Baffert. It was gonna take a lot for her to find the turf. Baffert eventually tried her down the hill before they transferred her to Stidham, and she ran okay down the hill, going 6.5 at Santa Anita. She had a year off. Comes back at Ellis Park and runs in the flat mile race, and now is cutting back to the 6.5. I don't think this is the mile cut back to 6.5 that we love out in California, because that turf course is a little bit different. But I still think it's the same idea. It's a European style turf course with some ups and some downs, and now she's cutting back off of the layoff from 1 to 6 and 6.5, and she's shown her ability to sprint in the past. So noted and quoted is kind of the value play to me. And Conte Partiro obviously can win, but it feels like the race is going to run through Lull and Ruby Notion. I'm going to pick noted and quoted for the fun of it.
I love that pick, JK, and I think it's also safe to say she's probably a bit of a flow upgrade who was prepping for the last race too for noted and quoted. I couldn't really get past Lull. I don't disagree about using a couple more, but whatever I do, I'd probably press up Lull a little bit just for the class and the projected trip. What is it, Scott? Are you going to be loyal to your old pal Ruby Notion, or are you going in a different direction here?
I am completely against Ruby Notion. Will not be on any ticket. She had the perfect, absolute perfect setup in her last race. It was going to be a huge speed duel with tons of horses wanting the lead. She was carrying 116, which was much less than the other horses. And it was a soft course, and she ran the race of her life. She ran a significantly faster race than she had ever run before. It was like a 5-point top if you're looking at the sheets, and on Bayer it's probably noticeable too. So now she's carrying 125, and that's to me, that's the way you make money. Is you play the horse when it's perfect, when everything is perfect, and then you go against them, when everybody else is coming along for the ride. So I'll be against Ruby Notion. I'm going to go with a bomb ski here in the 10, Minds and Magic. She has never won on turf. She's only run twice on turf, but her first race, she lost to Aeroforce. That was on the turf. And then as a 3-year-old, she ran in a graded race at Del Mar on the turf. It was her second turf start, and she ran against Harmonize. And she finished 7th that day, but she was only 3 lengths behind Harmonize, who I believe is a Grade 1 winner. Indeed. So I think Del Mar. Yeah. And I think she has her mother won 2 routes on the turf. So she's got the breeding that says she might win on the turf. And she's circling back on the sheets. She's circling back to her best number. So yeah, she's carrying 121, so it's 4 pounds less than the 2 favorites. She's going to be my key horse. But I will also use Lull and Spelker and even Originator in the pick 4.
Lots of good stuff there. I love the creative long shots coming from the crew in this race. I love your point about Ruby Notion. The old phrase we use sometimes is last time was the time. She does have that last time was the time vibe. What makes it last time was the time? Well, everything works out trip-wise, and you look last time 27-1, this time on the morning line you see 3-1. Those are the exact kind of factors that conspire to make a horse player say last time was the time. And I definitely see where you're coming from there. You made a couple of points, Scott, about weight, which isn't something that I know I look at it, but it's not something that JK or I talk about all that much on the pod. We did have a listener question about how much we factor in weight and how we use it. Is it do we quantify it almost as like they do in the UK, where you're essentially adding it to the figure you project a horse runs, or is it, for me, it's slipperier than that? How do you talk about how you look at weight and how you use it in your handicapping?
Well, it is a very important factor in my handicapping. For example, in the 7th, Bonnie Arch, I respect Jonathan's choice of that horse. On the numbers, she fits. But she did just run not only the fastest race of her life, but is carrying 125. So the 2 horses that I'm keying in on are only carrying 121. I think it makes more of a difference when a horse is coming off a peak effort, when they're carrying, toting that extra heavy weight. So, to me, that just adds ammunition to exclude the horse. In the case of the 8th, Ruby Notion, she's increasing her impost by 9 pounds. So she was the lightest horse in that race, and now she's the heaviest. So usually 4 pounds, it's kind of borderline, like whether that's going to sway me. But anything more than starting at 5 pounds, that's a significant. And it also, I also include ground loss. So if this can be a horse that's on the lead, like I'm Betty G, then the 125, it doesn't matter so much, right? That's why I'm still going to use on Betty G, because she's going to save ground by being on the lead, and that's going to eliminate that handicap for her. Whereas a horse like Bonnie Arch, I think she comes from off the pace, and so she's going to have to run farther and carry all that extra weight. So that's why I'd be against her.
We'll have to talk about this on another show, different ways of factoring in all the, we look at a final speed figure, and the way to take a speed figure and turn it into a performance figure, looking at things like pace, like ground loss, like weight. It's something that we could definitely do a whole show about in the future. But just real quick, JK, just to get back to the listener's question, do you look at weight at all?
I don't ever really. But to be honest, I really like Scott's idea about the horses that are going to lose ground with that extra weight. I like Scott said, I mean, if I see there's a threshold, I could care less about 1 or 2 pounds. But if it starts to be a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pound difference, and now that horse is also projecting to get a wide trip, it is something that I might actually start to peek at. I don't think it's going to make decisions for me, but like Scott said, a lot of times in these situations, you're trying to find ammunition against a horse's chances so that you can make an intelligent decision of fading or using. And sometimes you just need another extra check or two to push you over the edge. So it's definitely always something to keep in mind.
Is it fair to say, Scott, that it's a factor, weight is a factor you use more to knock horses out than to leave them in, or is it more 50-50 for you?
Yeah, I'd say 50-50.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the other sprint, the one for the boys, which goes as race 9. There'll be 5:29 Central on Saturday night. Scott, what do you think of this one?
All right, I'm really deep in this race. I would use Conquest Panthera, Vici, the Maker Horse, Blind Ambition, White Flag, Jazzy Times, and Done Deal. So I would go 6 deep in this race as far as the pick 4. And I'm trying to remember who I like the most. I think the horse I like the most is the 1, Conquest Panthera. Inside trip, wants to sprint. So, this 6.5 furlong distance at Kentucky Downs, I believe it's more taxing than other distances. It's more taxing than a 5.5 furlong race, and it's also Kentucky Downs, so you really need extra fitness. So horses that are cutting back in distance, like Conquest Panthera, have a big advantage, I think. So that would be my main choice, but I would go deep.
I like that point. I wish we'd had more time today to talk a little more generally. Maybe at some future time before next year's Kentucky Downs meet or something, we'll talk about all the intricacies of the course. But I would have to think that between the one turn, the extra distance, and the galloping uphill, more or the rising uphill, more of a galloper's track than the pure speed quickener's track that you see at 5.5. We've noted before the cutback, not always a good thing even. I would say it's not particularly a good thing, 5.5 at Saratoga. Whereas when you get to a situation that's a little bit more testing, like this configuration, like downhill at Santa Anita, those cutbacks become, to my mind, more appealing. JK, can you narrow this one down any more than Scott did?
I'll tell you what, Maniacal is gonna have to probably get therapy when he grows up, with both of all of us picking his full brother and none of us picking him. So there's going to be some issues for him when he gets old enough. He's not going to think he's good enough, and he's going to have to work through some things. I like Conquest Panthera as well. I like Blind Ambition running on that soft course at Saratoga, was finishing well that day. It's Todd, and when it comes to shipping and running in other jurisdictions and other situations, I don't think anyone can do that as well as Todd does. His operation is so professional. So I think while others are or having to deal with the ups and downs of that situation, I think Todd can sort through that well. He was working with some nice horses back in Saratoga. I think Blind Ambition could be tough here. But I think it's important to realize that Jazzy Times was always meant to be a really good horse. And then he just went sour. And then suddenly he's run these 2 fast figures. He's 2 for 2 on the turf. And I think that maybe they might have found out where he needed to be. And he's definitely one that I would include or keep an eye on with kind of getting to a surface that it seems like he's appreciating.
I'll let you explain the maniacal joke.
Oh, he's a full brother, like a full brother. Same mom, same dad, Kitten's Joy. Last of the summer wine is the dam. So I was just making the joke that poor maniacal. He's the redheaded little brother who doesn't get any love.
That's a big sibling to have to live up to. You probably know a little something about that. Your brother being a world famous musician while you're stuck here on a podcast with us.
Yeah, we've got different dams though.
In horse racing, that doesn't even. Never mind. All right, let's talk about the Kentucky Turf Cup. It's a Grade 3. It's going to close things out. JK, how do you see this one?
I'm going to give Bigger Picture another shot here. I liked Bigger Picture in the Sword Dancer. And obviously for the reasons that Scott landed on Glorious Empire, that was a tough race for Bigger Picture. The pace wasn't really there. He was sixth the majority of the race and just couldn't really quicken with those. Mike Maker does really well at Kentucky Downs. So I think Bigger Picture is going to present some value, especially with other horses in here. They're going to take some money, like Oscar Nominated, so on and so forth. Oscar Nominated has won twice at Kentucky Downs. He's 2 for 2 here. So with it being the kind of the tricky situation with the course, I would definitely keep that one in mind. And another horse that I'm going to give another shot is Manitoulin. We talked about Manitoulin running in the Fort Marcy where Robert Bruce was and Spring Quality were, and then he ran in the race where Spring Quality won on Belmont Day, and then didn't show up for whatever reason. The Bowling Green, but shows back up here. Maybe it was the soft ground. Those are the 3 that I need: Manitoulin, Bigger Picture, and Oscar Nominated. Officially, I'll go on the record as Bigger Picture being my pick. And yes, I see the green and yellow out there, and I'm not falling for it.
Well, it's not a 3-year-old. It's not a 3-year-old restricted race, so it's not necessarily true that a Donegal horse is gonna knock us out. But we do have our old friend Arklow in here. Good luck, Elliot, and I mean that in the sincere way, not in the good luck way. I mean, this horse has stepped up many times, and another big result would be no surprise. Are you reflexively against him, JK, or you just don't think he fits the race, or a little more on our old pal?
No, I think he's a nice horse, but I just think some of these other ones have been banging heads with Tougher and just present a little bit more of a hike in class.
I say old pal. I should say old nemesis. Scott, who wins this one?
This was pretty easy for me. I like Manitoulin. The horse it's the fastest horse. Won the Hollywood Turf Cup at the distance, and ran really big in the Manhattan, where had a very tough trip and still lost by only 3/4 of a length. Yep. I would toss that last race completely because it was on the soft and just didn't take to it. And 6-1, nice post, and carrying a little bit less weight at 1.5 miles. That's the one I'm rolling with, but I'm also including, I'm only going too deep in the pick 4. I'm including Arklow because I don't want to underestimate that horse and that trainer. And the numbers fit with that horse.
Well, we've seen it. Like I said, we've seen him step up. We've seen him step up before in various situations. Is he one who prefers a cut in the ground? Do you think, Scott? Is he the opposite, or do you like him on all surfaces?
That's a good question. We don't have that much time to handicap these things before the pod, so I did not look at that. I see that he, on the yielding course, the complete bog, he lost by 4 lengths to Yoshida. I don't know. I like that he stepped up to that he won his last race at 1.25 miles, and he has run 1.5 miles. when it comes to the turf condition, they have to run badly on like soft, I think, twice for me to say, all right, like I'm going to toss that horse on this kind of condition. So I'm going to give him another shot. And I believe the number for that yielding turf classic, I believe that number came up okay. So
yes.
So I'm not gonna worry about it in this case.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, when he has done fine on, I always think of him winning over that. I think it was softer than good American turf when he, the day that started, the win picture that's on JK's wall cost us the pick 6 on the 17 Derby. I think of that performance. But you look back, he's won on firm when he's supposed to have won on firm. And he's got that pedigree that suggests no matter what the turf condition is, he's going to be running well. Anyway, it's going to be fascinating to see. I don't know. At this point, I think when I see Arklow, when I see the Donegal colors in a race, they're just – I'm going to pass, or they're always going to be included in some way, because I've just seen that movie before. I've touched that hot stove too many times. If you follow. All right, Scott, thank you so much. We're going to let you get back to handicapping, get back to your work, get back to administering publichandicapper.com. Before one last thing before I let you go. It's even though there are the 3 main contests on Public Handicapper throughout the year, folks can jump in and play at any time, right? And there's other contests within the contest that they're eligible for.
Right. You are not eligible to win the Public Handicapper Challenge if you join right now, because you can't. There aren't enough races left to reach the minimum. But if you ever pick 4 races, the winner of all 4 races any week, you get a 10-day subscription to DRF Formulator. And if you win the monthly contest, where you have to play every race that month, you win a 30-day subscription, unlimited, to DRF Formulator or PPs, PDF PPs. So yeah, there's always a way to win. If you do well, you're going to win something.
And it's also, I just believe that the real utility of it, obviously, it's great to free roll for prizes. Who doesn't like that? But that ability to write your own analyses, read the analyses of other sharp people. Definitely spend some time on Public Handicapper. Thank you so much, Scott. We will have you on again soon. JK, I'm going to have you stick around for a minute. But Scott, we'll talk to you as soon as we can.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, man.
Bye-bye.
All right, JK, I know you wanted to dedicate at least a few minutes at the end of this show to talking about the start of the football season. As somebody who's dabbled when in Las Vegas in the past, at betting on football, and who coached football for a number of years, you have a really interesting perspective to me, because so much of the X's and O's chatter we hear about football is in the network TV environment, where they, at least to now, have pretended gambling doesn't exist. And then so much of the gambling chatter that we hear, while there's a lot of great stuff out there, doesn't always take into account the X's and the O's. I like your intersection of the two. What are some storylines you're looking at as we enter week 1 of the NFL, week 2 of college football?
Yeah, it was really apparent last night listening to the Eagles and the Falcons broadcast and Chris Collinsworth, and like so many announcers do, they like to talk about the same thing over and over again. But there actually was something to last night's broadcast where he was continuously talking about the run-pass option. And it kind of brought up this old kind of theory I've always had when it comes to betting over-unders in football, that these teams that are doing this hurry-up spread offense thing that score a lot of points, typically their over-unders are higher than they should be. And one of the things that I want to look to do, and I wanted to encourage other people to look at, is this run-pass option and how I think it's going to affect some over and unders. For instance, a game that I'm looking forward to trying to look at the under on this weekend is UCLA and Oklahoma. UCLA obviously just got Chip Kelly. Oklahoma is a spread offense, and I think they scored 63 points last week. But when you incorporate the run pass option, I think that it actually sets up for a lot of underplay. And here's why I think that. What the run pass option is by definition is it's kind of just old school football, what the triple option used to be. Back in the day, where the quarterback would take the ball, run at an uncovered outside linebacker, and make that an unblocked outside linebacker, make that unblocked outside linebacker either commit to the pitch man or commit to the quarterback, and the quarterback would make a read accordingly. If he comes to the quarterback, he pitches it to the running back. If he goes to the running back, he cuts it up and keeps the ball. Think Nebraska football in the 90s. So what it's kind of evolved into now, and I think Oregon got really popular with doing it, was it started as kind of this bubble screen error. They would do the same thing. They would, they'd be in the shotgun. They would snap the ball to the quarterback. He would then read the outside linebacker. If the outside linebacker is chasing the run down, then he'd pull it and throw the bubble screen. If he respects the bubble screen, then he'd hand the ball to the running back, and they wouldn't have to account for blocking that man that they're reading. In our scheme, we would say that's the quarterback's man. He's reading that situation. Well, what they've done recently is they've now took that whole theme and made it a little bit more down the field. And they're throwing the ball down the field more to slants and more intermediate routes instead of the behind the line of scrimmage situation. And what's happened there is why it's been so long to evolve is because of the rule in the NFL and in college of a legal man downfield, meaning that a lineman cannot be downfield when there's a pass happening downfield. He's an ineligible receiver because he's covered by the outside receivers. We won't go into all of that. So what they've done now is they're taking advantage of that gray area, and what they're doing is they're run blocking with the 5 offensive linemen, and sometimes only 3 of them, and they're reading a downfield the defender, and if that defender is respecting the run, then they'll pull and they'll throw, a slant or a 5-yard in or an intermediate route. If that defender who they're reading is respecting the pass and staying in those passing lanes, then they'll then hand the ball off. And so how I think this affects the over-under is in a lot of situations, these teams are able to they're involved in more run game. They're involved in more intermediate pass game where those tackles are made in bounds and in college short of a first down. So the clock continues to run. Another thing that happens is they're moving the chains more often, and they're not getting themselves into positions where they're punting from their own 5. They're moving the ball. They're getting first downs. Then they're getting stopped for a sack or a bad call or whatever, and then they're punting, and the game is happening between the 30s. And the ball just lives in between the 30s, and when that happens, there's a lot less points being scored. The clock is always running. And so I love – one of my favorite angles always was betting Oregon when they were good, because everyone thinks that they score 70 points a game and they're just throwing it all over the place. But in reality, a majority of Oregon's offense was based on running the football. And they did it effectively. They did it often, but the over-under is already set. That's why the over-under is 70 or whatever. I think the over-under –
it compensates for it. I mean, I feel like intuitively to me, what you're saying makes way more sense in the NFL environment where that clock keeps running, unlike the college environment where every first down is a timeout, and that's why games take 4 hours. But we're talking about a fluid betting market, not unlike the parimutuel markets where that fact of all the extra plays that you're going to get in college, that gets reflected in the final number. So you're saying you think there's still as much, if not more, equity on these run-pass option teams in college as in the NFL? Absolutely, because the under is what the I'm trying to think of an equation. The under is the no-name trainer in racing. Like, no one wants to bet that. They all want to bet the over. They want to bet the Chad Brown, the Jason Service, the Todd Pletcher. So if you can find an under, it's always generally going to be a more attractive situation, especially the higher unders. The 35-game unders in the NFL, those are tough. But if you can find those 60s and 70s and those unders, it's a huge edge, in my opinion, because the game, the public is typically betting the over. And if you can find those situations, it's good. And the other thing about it is to score, I think this over-under for the UCLA and Oklahoma game is like 64.5. For two teams to score 64.5, there has to be some real efficiency, some real good quarterback play, some special teams touchdowns or a pick six. Teams don't just go back and forth like that. And I think UCLA is playing a
their second quarterback, a freshman. Oklahoma is playing a kid named Kyler Murray, who actually had the unfortunate having to coach against him when I was at Plano East. He was at Allen, and we played against him, and he's really good. But it's hard to get to 64.5 points, especially earlier on in the year when you're still trying to work through kinks and introduce new players to the offense. So I like that game under. I think for a lot of different reasons, but mostly the UCLA Chip Kelly situation, where I think they're going to do a lot of RPO stuff, a lot of run pass option, keep that ball in between the 30s, and I think it'll be hard for them to get to that number.
Did you have an opportunity to look? You mentioned you might look at the NFL slate and see if there was an angle to present.
I will say this. Here's some teams that are going to do it, right? Teams with not necessarily running quarterbacks, but athletic quarterbacks that find themselves in the gun. I would think that you'll see a lot of that from Green Bay. They have another scheme that they kind of introduced, which is a little bit of a run pass option thing where you're putting a lot of pressure on the officials to make a call, where they'll be in a trip set. They will throw a quick out route down the field to an inside receiver, and the two outside guys are never running routes. They're always blocking. That's a legal man downfield, but it's such a gray area that they get away with it. And so I think those run pass options are something that Green Bay would probably do, something you probably see with a team like the Panthers with Christian McCaffrey and Cam Newton. So I would look for some of those teams that kind of incorporate some of that stuff when it comes to those over-unders. And those shotgun teams are also the teams that have the really high over-unders that I think you can find some edge and get under those numbers. Last night was a great example of it with the Eagles.
Well, I like the way you're describing the Green Bay scheme. I guess we've seen that in New England as well, where it almost reminds me of the old trap in the NHL, where it's like when there's a foul on every play, you're sort of daring somebody to call it, that kind of thing. And you think that will lead to counterintuitively, you think it will lead to more opportunities on the under. Am I reading that right?
I do. I just think that the teams that run a lot of that RPO, the game is going to be played between the 30s. So you're going to have missed field goals. You're going to have, field goal opportunities. You're going to have the field constantly switching back and forth. Short fields and turnovers are what create over-unders. It's not explosive offenses. Good offenses take advantage of those short fields and those turnovers and those and so on. But it's not just like, it's Aaron Rodgers versus Drew Brees. They're going to go over. You can always find those games how the turnovers and the field position are what impact those overs and unders.
And again, just to underline, JK is not saying they're going to score fewer points in aggregate than average teams. What he's saying is the relationship between the number that gets posted and the results you're going to see on the field might for a little while present an opportunity on the under because his view is so counterintuitive. It's a market economy. Eventually it'll adjust. But before the market adjusts, that's the opportunity to pounce. I assume you advise these select teams looking at the unders these first few weeks of the season, and specifically this week with Green Bay and with the Panthers.
Green Bay, the Panthers, those are obviously ones you could do, but the one I like the most is that takes place in college with UCLA and OU.
All right. We are out of time. We ran a little bit over, but I think we're still in the window of acceptability. I want to thank Scott Carson, publichandicapper.com. I want to thank you, JK. Excellent work on both the racing and football side of things this time around. Thank producers AJ and Craig, Willie Nile, and Travis Stone for providing the theme song most of all, and voiceover. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. Keep those questions coming. At Looms Boldly here, at UT Big Hair there. Podcast at DRF.com. That's another way to fly, or hashtag DRFpod. We'll get them. We'll answer them. We'll have fun doing so. We'll be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.